In Luke 11:47 to 48, Jesus rebukes the forefathers of the scribes and the Pharisees. Quote, "Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets, and it was your fathers who killed them. So you are witnesses and approve the deeds of your fathers, because it was they who killed them, and you build their tombs." End quote. Here, Jesus is affirming it was the spiritual ancestors of the scribes and the Pharisees who murdered the Old Testament prophets, not the scribes and Pharisees themselves. In the parallel passage of the same story in Matthew 23:31, Jesus is even more explicit. Quote, "So you testify against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets." End quote. Jesus goes on to state in Luke 11:50 to 51, quote, "So that the blood of all the prophets shed since the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the house of God. Yes, I tell you, it shall be charged against this generation." End quote. By saying you, Jesus is not saying the scribes and the Pharisees murdered Zechariah, but they were guilty by association because they approved of their forefathers murdering the prophets, since they built their tombs. However, Matthew 23:35 reads Zechariah the son of Berechiah, which some assume Jesus asserting this is the last murdered prophet of the Old Testament era, Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. Yet, EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, conceded the last murdered Old Testament prophet was John the Baptist, not Zechariah, his father. So why does Matthew add the son of Zechariah while Luke omits it? Was this patronym in the original manuscript, or was it a later interpolation added to or changed from the original? The footnote for Matthew 23:35 in the English Standard Version of the Bible reads, "Some manuscripts omit the son of Berechiah." Although it reads some manuscripts omit it, there's evidence in the early church era that this may be a valid claim that it was not part of the original text. In his commentary on Matthew 23:35, Jerome writes, quote, "Others want this Zechariah to be the one who was killed between the sanctuary and the altar by Joash, king of Judea, as the history of reigns narrates, or the kings recorded in 2 Chronicles. But one should observe that Zechariah was not the son of Berechiah, but the son of Jehoiada, the priest. Since then, not only do we have Zechariah, but also the place of the killing is in agreement. We need to ask why he is called the son of Berechiah and not of Jehoiada. Berechiah means blessed of the Lord in our language, and the Hebrew name of the priest Jehoiada signifies righteousness. In the gospel that the Nazarenes use, in place of son of Berechiah, we have found it written son of Jehoiada. In his work, The Blood from Abel to Zechariah in the History of Interpretation, Edmund Gallagher writes, quote, "There seem to be 4 reasons why Jerome favors this Zechariah. First, the location of the death offers strong support. Second, the name Zechariah provides a match. Third, Jerome successfully devises an explanation for the variant patronyms. They present no real difficulty because Jehoiada and Berechiah mean similar things in Hebrew. Fourth, Jerome again employs his knowledge of Hebrew to inform his readers that the Gospel of the Nazarenes, written in Hebrew, contains the correct patronym for Zechariah. He implies that this version of the Gospel may contain the original reading. Thus, Jerome favors this view not only because it makes sense and absolves him from relying on traditions preserved only in the Apocrypha, as Origen and Priscillian had before him, but also because it provides the opportunity in multiple ways of displaying his expertise in Hebrew and its usefulness for exegesis." End quote. The Gospel of the Nazarenes was originally written in Hebrew in the 2nd century. Epiphanius of Salamis wrote to the Ebionites in the 4th century, quote, "They call it," that is, the Gospel of the Nazarenes, "the Gospel according to the Hebrews. For the truth is that Matthew is the only one of the New Testament writers who published his gospel and preaching in the Hebrew language and Hebrew characters." End quote. Papias of Hierapolis, writing in the 1st century, conceded, quote, "Matthew compiled the sayings of Christ in the Hebrew language." End quote. Jerome, agreeing with both Epiphanius and Papias, wrote, quote, Matthew, also called Levi, was the first who composed the gospel of Christ, and for sake of those who believed in Christ among the Jews, wrote it in the Hebrew language and letters. Moreover, the Hebrew copy is to this time preserved in the library of Caesarea. End quote. In his commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, Jerome writes, quote, in the Gospel of the Nazarene, which the Nazarenes use for the son of Berechiah, I find written the son of Jehoiada. End quote. Here, Jerome is referring to Matthew 23:35, which he, Epiphanius, and others affirmed was written originally in Hebrew and included the phrase the son of Jehoiada instead of the son of Berechiah. Under the article on the Gospel of the Nazarenes on earlychristianwritings.com, the commentary on Matthew 23:35 reads, there can be no doubt that Jerome replaced this name with Berechiah, for it was clearly in the Hebrew original as Jehoiada, end quote. This explains why the Vulgate reads the son of Berechiah instead of the son of Jehoiada, which was the original reading in Hebrew of Matthew 23:35, according to Jerome, Epiphanius, Origen, Priscillian, and Papias. In his commentary on Matthew 23:35, the 7th to 8th century Christian scholar Peter of Laodicea, who was likely the bishop there, said of Zechariah the son of Jehoiada, quote, for he was of two names, end quote. John Calvin writes in his Harmony of the Evangelists, quote, there is no absurdity in supposing that Zechariah's father Jehoiada received, in token of respect, the surname of Berechiah, because having throughout his whole life defended the true worship, he might justly be pronounced to be the blessed of God. But whether Jehoiada had two names, or whether, as Jerome thinks, there was a mistake in the word, there can be no doubt as to the fact that Christ refers to the impious stoning of Zechariah, which is recorded in 2 Chronicles 24, verses 21 to 22, end quote. These are the 4 points that Jerome was making in his commentary on Matthew 23:35. 1. Jesus affirms the method of Zechariah's death found in 2 Chronicles. 2. The name Zechariah is the same. 3. Jerome explains the difference in patronyms. Son of Berechiah versus son of Jehoiada have similar meanings in Hebrew, blessed and righteousness. And 4. The original Hebrew has Jehoiada, not Berechiah, mentioned by Jerome and later being changed to Berechiah, likely by Jerome himself. The implications of the original reading in Matthew 23:35 as Zechariah the son of Jehoiada is that Jesus could not have been addressing the murder of the chronological prophets in the Old Testament era, despite Jesus saying all of the prophets, since that would end with the murder of John the Baptist. And Jesus couldn't have been addressing the prophets murdered chronologically in the Hebrew Bible, since that would have been Uriah the son of Shemaiah in Jeremiah 26 verses 20 to 23, who was murdered after Zechariah the son of Jehoiada. Nor could Jesus have been prophesying a Zechariah who would be murdered after he spoke, since he was addressing the past. Rather, whether the original reading was Zechariah the son of Berechiah, Zechariah the son of Jehoiada, or just Zechariah, Jesus was addressing all of the shed blood of all of the prophets, beginning with the first murdered prophet recorded in the first book of the Hebrew canon, Genesis, to the last murdered prophet recorded in the last book of the Hebrew canon, 2 Chronicles, which Jesus wasn't creating a canon, but referencing one that had already been settled before he was born. For an alternative explanation for the rabbinic name conflation argument advanced by Z.H. Chayes for why Matthew 23:35 reads the son of Berechiah, and Dr. Michael Rydelnik's explanation in his book The Messianic Hope, why 2 Chronicles specifically is the last book of the Hebrew Bible instead of the last chronological book like Nehemiah, or the last book accepted into the canon like Ecclesiastes or Esther, click the links in the description below or the windows on this screen.